Qantas racks up $7 billion in losses but promises things will get better. Record profits for miners and a megamerger in the financial services sector. It's Friday, the 26th of August, 2022. Welcome to Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael. Very, very busy day.
Gosh, there's a lot on. They are all big stories, and there are plenty more as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of earnings results, a lot of stuff going on overseas as well. Banning of petrol cars in California. Just a great news day.
Yeah. Big news day. Plenty to get through. Two little things I need to mention before we get too deep into the news, though, Sean. Number one is we've had a bunch of people contacting us, asking us where SafeWord is. It normally comes out every Thursday, so it should have been out yesterday. It is just on hiatus, just for a little while. We're working on a few other projects and things at the moment as well, so SafeWord's just taking a little bit of a break, but stay tuned on that one. The other thing I wanted to mention to you, Sean, is a really, really nice review that we have received on Apple Podcasts in the last couple of days. It is from a listener. I'm assuming this isn't their real name because I don't think anyone's name is actually Blue Couch. It may well be a pseudonym. And they said that it is timely and topical business banter. My daily commute tends to put a smile on my fellow walkers as I regularly laugh out loud listening to Fear and Greed. Aside from the humour, the content is a great summary of the day's business news. How good's that?
How good is that? Go Blue Couch.
Yeah, go Blue Couch. There is a little bit more to it as well, but I'll actually save that for later, towards the end of the podcast, because I have gotten in trouble from you a little bit in the past for going too off topic too early in the podcast, and the rest of that review is very much off topic. So I'll raise that a little bit later on. But the interview today, Sean, it is part 2 of your chat with Kelly Bayer-Rosmarin, the CEO of Optus. Part 1 was earlier in the week, and now we've got part 2.
Yeah, part 1 was all about Optus and the telco sector. Part 2 is all about leadership and how she manages all these people that she looks after, and how she feels she has a real responsibility to bring other managers through, not just in Optus, but really across the board. It's a really interesting chat.
Yeah, it sure is. It's coming up a little bit later on. The main story, though, this morning, Sean, Qantas will buy back $400 million of shares, signalling its confidence in the future and declaring the restoration of its financial strength, with revenue rising 53% to $9.1 billion for fiscal 2022.
But Qantas still lost $860 million. That brings its COVID losses to a staggering $7 billion.
Wow.
It's actually remarkable Qantas is around at all after what it's gone through over the past few years. CEO Alan Joyce says $25 billion in revenue went missing through the pandemic, and things have not fully returned to normal. Domestic capacity is back to 100%, but international is still only at 63% of pre-COVID levels. Worth noting that this year's loss came despite a gain of more than $600 million from selling some land around its Mascot airport base. Needless to say, no dividend was declared, but shareholders were buoyed by the $400 million share buyback. And the airline's share price jumped 7% yesterday. Though we've got to put that buyback into perspective, the airline raised $1.4 billion from shareholders at the start of the pandemic.
Sean, something that I'm sure would be a little bit kind of unclear for a few people is this question of how can Alan Joyce say financial strength is restored if they've lost $7 billion?
Well, I suppose the buyback does signal that a bit. I mean, one thing is that debt is under control. Qantas now has a lower debt than it did in the global financial crisis. So that probably is what he's referring to. He's also been stripping costs out through the pandemic. Plane purchases have been deferred. The old 747s have all been retired, and most of the 747s have been retired, and nearly 10,000 employees have been let go.
So does that then explain kind of why there have been so many late and cancelled flights?
Partly, but it's also sick leave from COVID and the flu and those 7-day isolation restrictions. Mr. Joyce said on any given day, more than 300 pilots are on sick leave or isolating. Qantas has suffered some serious reputational damage in recent months and even went so far to apologise and hand out $50 flight vouchers and lounge invitations. Mr. Joyce says he has a plan to fix things. 1,500 people have been recruited, and he's up pressure on his suppliers to ensure labour availability. Now, I haven't tried to call the call centre recently, but Mr. Joyce reckons the wait times at the Qantas call centre are better now than they were pre-COVID.
You know what? I can actually vouch for that because I mentioned earlier in the week that we were trying to change some flights and doing it all online. In the end, we needed to call the call centre. We were through in about 2 minutes.
Oh, wow. That is good.
That is really fast compared to the very, very long waits that we're hearing about kind of over the last couple of months where people would be waiting hours. It really feels like that part, at least, has now been smoothed out. Anyway, away from Qantas, local markets, what else happened yesterday?
The S&P ASX 200 rose 0.7% to 7,048 points, with real estate investment trusts, energy and industrial stocks doing best and consumer staples doing worst. Among the large caps, Michael, Goodman Group jumped 4%, while Woodside Energy and Macquarie were both up around 2%. Most of the large stocks rose, really. One notable underperformer was Domino's Pizza, which tumbled 9% the day after its earnings result, giving back Wednesday's gains.
All right, what's the latest from international markets?
Well, Wall Street's in a bit of a holding pattern ahead of Jerome Powell's big speech tonight at Jackson Hole. Tech shares were up a bit, but everything else was pretty flat, except the energy stocks, which were boosted by higher oil prices as the Saudis hinted at supply cuts. Now, Mr. Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, is likely to keep on message about rates tonight, as the US still has work to do to stop inflation. The path to fixing inflation looks somewhat rocky. The underlying forces driving it higher aren't going anywhere anytime soon. Things like deglobalization, tight labour markets, persistently high energy and commodity prices, they're hanging around, and it makes it tricky to see price rises settling down anytime soon.
All right, big day. We're only just getting started. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has launched a royal commission into the Morrison government's controversial robo-debt scheme.
That's right. The robo-debt scheme used automated systems to collect overpayments from Centrelink recipients. It was ruled unlawful by the federal court in 2019, but not before it recovered $750 million from nearly 400,000 people. Labor committed to a royal commission at the election, and the terms of reference will have former Queensland Supreme Court Justice Catherine Holmes investigate how it came about and how people were affected.
And just also on politics, Sean, the agenda for next week's Jobs and Skills Summit has been announced.
Yes, unemployment is at a near 50-year low, and keeping it that way is top of the agenda. Wages are also going to be a topic of debate, as are fixing skills shortages, likely through lifting migration. In fact, migration will be a main topic on day 2 of the summit, and it looks like the government wants unions and business to agree that lifting the intake is in both their interests. The government also wants to increase the required pay level that temporary immigrant employees must receive to be awarded a visa to migrate. In theory, that should encourage more skilled migrants because they'll be earning more money. You can also expect to hear some big ambit claims over the next few days, including the union proposal yesterday to allow workers to strike across multiple different employers.
Okay, now there are a few big earnings results that we need to talk about. Let's start in the grocery section. On Wednesday, Sean, we heard Coles telling us that it was safe to buy lettuce again, that it was coming back down towards $3. Now it's Woolworth's turn.
Woolies said its food sales rose 4.5% last financial year, which is pretty good given product shortages from the floods and staff shortages from COVID. And leaving aside the Endeavour Liquor Pubs and Pokies group that it spun out during the year, net profit was in line with last year's $1.5 billion. But Chief Executive Brad Banducci said he's seeing signs that costs of living pressures and interest rate rises are starting to bite households. Investors didn't like that news, and Woolworth's share price fell more than 3%. Just like Coles, people are buying more canned goods and frozen vegetables and are switching from minced beef to minced chicken and pork because they're cheaper. Inflation is a real issue for Australia and is starting to genuinely affect household spending.
Sean, the mining companies seem to be doing pretty well, though.
Sure are. South32 reported it's a BHP spin-off that's named for the Southern Hemisphere latitude, linking its mines in Australia, South Africa and South America. It posted a net profit after tax of $2.7 billion, a record, sending its share price higher. South32 mines metals like aluminium, copper and zinc. It's enjoyed huge price increases this year. And before we leave South32, Michael, come on, didn't you like the the line about the Southern Hemisphere latitude linking its mines.
That's what I was about to comment on, that is a fantastic piece of trivia. The fact that that's the latitude linking the mines in those locations. It makes so much sense. I would like it a little bit more if it was a name that told you exactly what it does, as we've discussed
Mining
before.
on latitude. I don't know. Yep.
No, look, anyway, but for a piece of kind of corporate trivia, I give it a A+.
Excellent.
A+, Sean. Well done.
Good.
Look, another one enjoying huge price rises, and really its moment in the sun, is Whitehaven Coal.
It sure is. Profit soared to $2 billion. That's 5 times more than last year. Whitehaven mines coal for electricity production, called thermal coal, and for making steel, which is called metallurgical coal. Thermal coal prices are soaring on the back of the Russia-Ukrainian conflict. Metallurgical coal prices are not quite as hot as the global economy is cooling and making less steel, really. Still, the overall achieved coal price at Whitehaven last financial year was $325 a tonne, compared to just $95 a tonne last year. That's meant a huge turnaround for the company that only last year was $800 million in debt and mired in write-downs and losses. As of today, it's paid off all those debts and it now has more than $1 billion cash in hand. Most of that will go to shareholders. One of the great turnaround stories.
That's an incredible turnaround story. In fact, it is so good that I'm taking notes on it for our weekend edition, potentially as the remarkable story of the week. So hands off. Dreamworld owner Sean, Ardent Leisure, has posted another loss.
Yes, but it's not quite as it seems. Only recently, Ardent Leisure sold off the most successful part of its business, Main Event, which runs bowling alleys and laser tag games in America. What's left is the Dreamworld and Whitewater World theme parks and an observation deck on top of the Q1 Tower overlooking Surfers Paradise. So the 2022 result was a big lift in sales to $637 million and a worsening loss of $97 million. But the underlying story is actually a recovery in theme park revenue, up 37% to just under $50 million. It's been a torrid few years for Ardent since that 2016 accident on the Thunder River Rapids ride that killed 4 people. Gary Weiss, the corporate raider and former right-hand man of investor Ron Brearley, took control of the company shortly after that accident. Then COVID hit, locking us all out of theme parks. Now, it all sounds like bad news, but in fact, shareholders have done okay in Ardent, especially considering 2 years ago, the shares hit a low of 20 cents, and even more so when you count a 95 cent a share capital return shareholders got from selling the Main Event business. Gary Weiss says the positive momentum of the last few months should continue into this financial year, particularly as international visitors return.
Okay, on the tourism theme, Sean, we also heard yesterday from Flight Centre.
Yes, and it's on the mend. Flight Centre only lost $287 million last financial year, much better than the $433 million it lost the year before. Importantly, revenue jumped about 150% to $1 billion. And Chairman Gary Smith said that because we're all travelling more, the company actually broke even in the second half. He says the travel recovery will continue, but he wouldn't be drawn on forecasts. He says that while COVID lockdowns are probably over, there's little visibility around government's future strategies or intentions.
All right. Now, Sean, on the list of things that you and I have in common, we are both involved in fear and greed. I'm sure there's many other things, but my list was actually very short. I only have 2 things at the moment. And that is that...
We both like Ted Lasso?
Yes, we both like Ted Lasso. And I thought that you liked space and kind of aeroplane stories and things, but then you had a bit of a crack at me over that one on the weekend edition a few weeks ago, so I've scrubbed that one out. But the main reason for all of this, the segue here, is actually that you and I both at various times have worked for the Nine Entertainment Group. And yesterday, Nine reported.
Yes, and it had a record year last financial year, posting its highest ever pre-tax earnings, and its net profit was up 71%. That sent its share price up 9%. And pretty much everywhere is doing pretty well. Broadcast earnings rose 20%. The old Fairfax newspaper earnings were up 50%. And its majority-owned real estate group, Domain, lifted earnings 21%. Stan, the TV streaming service, now has 2.5 million subscribers. They were not quite sure how many of those are watching Stan Sport. It shows how well Australia has been doing. Media companies have always been a bellwether for the economy, as advertising spending tracks business and consumer confidence. Nine is confident about the outlook and announced a share buyback, which the market celebrated, but it will be interesting to see if they can just keep up this pace.
And while we're on consumer confidence, Sean, how is Zip doing?
The buy now, pay later group was the flavour of the month for a while, but the business model really is fraying at the edges. Zip has always been a bit of a poor cousin to Afterpay. It racked up $1 billion in losses last financial year. Incredible. It also racked up record transactions, customer numbers and revenue, but it amounted to naught in the face of an $800 million plus write-off and $276 million in bad debts.
And finally, Sean, there is a takeover, really a mega merger in the financial sector.
Yes, fund manager Petrol is finally achieving its goal of merging with rival Pendal, which you might know better under its old name, BT Investment Management. It's been on again, off again for a while, but the boards have agreed Pendal shareholders will get about $6 a share. The price being paid is about $6 a share, though it's a bit convoluted and it really does depend on Perpetual's share price. Yesterday, Pendal's share price jumped 9% on the news. The deal creates a firm with $200 billion under management, one of the bigger fund managers in the country. And just a final note from the fundies sector, Michael, Kern Nelson is stepping down from the board at Platinum. He's pretty much a legend in funds management. He founded Platinum nearly 30 years ago and built it into a multi-billion-dollar business. He's now one of the country's biggest philanthropists with a big focus on the arts.
All right, moving on to overseas news. Sean, US President Joe Biden wants to forgive up to $20,000 in student loans for tens of millions of Americans.
That's right. More than 40 million Americans owe around $1.6 trillion in federal student debt. That's more than Americans owe on their credit cards or on car loans. The plan is to forgive debt for people earning less than $125,000. It is controversial and it's estimated to cost more than $300 billion over 10 years.
$1.6 trillion in student debt. That is a huge sum.
It sure is.
That's staggering. And staying in the US, a big story out of California with the state planning to ban petrol cars.
Yes, in line with our own ACT, California is going to vote next week on banning the sale of new internal combustion engine cars by 2035. It's a big step, not just because California is the largest economy in the US, but because other states will follow. California has more cars than most other states as well. So it's a real leader in the sector. And if it goes, lots of other states will follow.
And finally, Sean, nuclear power is back in the news, in Japan at least.
Well, yes, this is very interesting because it has really broad implications. Japan's been turning off nuclear reactors ever since the Fukushima disaster in 2011. But in the face of rising energy prices for coal and gas and the need to cut carbon emissions, Prime Minister Fumio Kishida has proposed developing a new series of smaller reactors and restart the mothballed ones they already have. He's not the only one. Germany is also figuring out how to reverse its anti-nuclear stance and get reactors back online. Many see nuclear power as the only way the world can truly get to net zero carbon emissions. Now, the plans are certainly good news for Australia's uranium producers. Their share prices surged yesterday. Paladin Energy jumped 12%, Deep Yellow rose 18%, and Bannerman Energy rose 16%. Energy Resources of Australia, probably the biggest of the lot, added about 6%.
All right, big story for Japan and a big story for Australia then too. All right, now up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview. And as I mentioned earlier, Sean, it's part 2 of your chat with the Optus CEO, Kelly Bayer-Rosmarin.
Yes, as I mentioned earlier in the show, it's all about how she manages people and a little bit about her career. And as a very successful female CEO, there's not a lot of those in the market. How she manages that and how she manages people, it's really interesting.
I actually thought the most interesting part of your chat, Sean, was when you asked her about how personal the industry actually is and how kind of rival companies like Telstra, everyone really not afraid to take quite personal shots at the people leading these companies. And it was quite a telling response from Kelly.
Yeah, it sure was. Worth a listen.
Yeah, absolutely. It's up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Now, Sean, I mentioned at the top of the show the review that we received from Blue Couch on Apple Podcasts. And if you'd like to leave a review, please do. That is always very gratefully received. But Blue Couch finished with this. They said, P.S. Gents, can I recommend pastrami, Philly cheese and jalapenos for your next Breville experiment? This is obviously it, after you mentioned the other day your favourite Breville toasted sandwich was, what was it, tomato, cheese and chutney?
Yeah, or
salami, cheese and
salami, cheese, chutney, tomato, yep.
Mm-hmm. What do you reckon?
Yeah, so jalapeno, Philly cheese and
pastrami.
Oh, I'm going to have a go, definitely.
No, it sounds a bit spicy for me. Though I tell you what, I'm trying to get back on board. I'm trying to get peanut butter and cheese happening as a thing.
Oh dear.
All right. Okay. Not much support there. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Friday, the 26th of August, 2022. Make sure you're following the podcast and join us online on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.